There comes a time in every student's life when they witness the true, unfiltered expertise of the one who is teaching them. In the case of the Sith, this moment comes when the master must flex their full power in the dark side for the student to witness. In some cases, it's to put their apprentice in their place, or in other cases, it's because they have no choice in a life or death situation. It was for the latter reason that Darth Sidious would finally feel the true power of his own master, Darth Plagueis. For decades, the Moon Sith Lord had wisely kept his strength a secret, never showing more than what was necessary in order to train his young pupil. But there came a time when Plagueis had to throw all pretense aside to save himself from certain death. And when that happened, we get to see Palpatine's sober reaction to a power greater than his own. Greetings again, lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. In today's holocron, we will be revisiting the Darth Plagueis novel yet again in order to explore what happened after Palpatine felt the true strength of his master for the first time. One of my favorite moments in the entire novel. The event would come sometime in or around the year 52 BBY. Palpatine and his master, Ego Damask, the alter ego of Darth Plagueis, had garnered themselves some enemies during their political schemes. Those enemies were the Grand Protectorate of Malastare, a group that had been slighted by Plagueis one too many times. They had already sent a hit out on Palpatine which had failed miserably. But the hit they sent out against Ego Damask would be carried out with much more efficiency, and it nearly succeeded. The men sent after Plagueis were the Maladian Assassins, an order of warriors who took the art of assassination as a religious practice. They were known to always carry out their contracts, and had even wounded and been known for killing Jedi Knights. And while they had no prior knowledge of Damask being a Dark Lord of the Sith, they did not balk at the idea of fighting Force sensitives whatsoever. With their intense combat training and their ability to work together seamlessly, they were extremely formidable enemies, even for a Sith Lord. Ego Damask had been invited to attend a ceremony within the order known as the Canted Circle. This was a secret society made up of only the topmost elite of the entire galaxy. Plagueis himself was not an official member, however, as he did not want them digging too deeply into his past and his personal life. But because of his great influence, he was treated as an honorary member and was invited in some of their most important ceremonies. In this case, Ego Damask was attending the ceremony of his good friend Larsh Hill. Larsh, who had unwittingly done much to aid the Sith cause. Hill was being inducted into the Order of the Canted Circle. But this would be where Plagueis would get much more out of the evening than he originally bargained for. The Sith Lord would be tested in a way that he hadn't been in decades. Everyone wore ceremonial robes with hoods pulled up, as was custom for this secret society. But unbeknownst to all of them until the very last moment, the Maladian Assassins had infiltrated the Order of the Canted Circle, and had disguised themselves within the robes of their very members. During the ceremony, Plagueis felt the dark side wash over him like a wave, alerting him to the imminent danger. Rather than act on his instinct, however, Plagueis suppressed his impulse so as to not prematurely reveal his true nature. This would prove to be a fatal mistake, however. In an instant, the Maladian Assassins decapitated Hill and sent dozens of razor-bladed discs flying around the room. Almost every member of the Canted Circle, including the Sun Guard standing watch, were murdered instantly within a matter of moments. Plagueis of course managed to dodge, but because he had restrained his natural instinct and the indications that the dark side had alerted within him, a decapitator disc had made off with a considerable portion of the Moon's jawbone and his neck. This resulted in his trachea and several blood vessels being severed in the process. The assassins pulled vibroblades next, and proceeded to go around butchering anyone still standing. Plagueis, however, managed to somewhat heal his neck enough in order to keep from lapsing into unconsciousness. There was no use in his hiding his true nature now. He had to fight for his life. And so, the Dark Lord unleashed the powers of the dark side. Across the city in the Senate office, his apprentice Sidious was relaxing from his evening. He was still riled up from having nearly been assassinated himself recently, and at that moment, he was feeling some venomous things towards his master. He felt as though he was being denied secrets of the dark side that he was owed. He wanted to know when he would become the master. He began to wonder if Plagueis was keeping powers secret for himself, hoarding them away. It was just then that Saint Pestage burst into the room without warning. Saint Pestage is someone you may recognize as being a sycophant of Palpatine's. But before those days, he was simply one of many contacts that Darth Plagueis had. Yet, he was also one of a small handful of individuals who was aware of the Rule of Two, and Damask and Palpatine's true nature. It was something that Saint Pestage kept on the down low, and did not discuss with the two Sith Lords, but it was a silent understanding that they had between each other. Plagueis often trusted Sate Pestage with ordering the Sith's dirty work to be done, and some time back, Sate had also hired the Maladian assassins to take out a political enemy of Palpatine's. Unfortunately though, that mission went awry, and the assassination was botched. In humiliation of how the mission had gone, the Maladian captain felt that as penance, he would disclose some important information to Sate. Sate would then tell Palpatine that the Maladians were hired to kill someone affiliated with the Mask Holdings, and he had thought that that individual was Palpatine. Sidious, now fully armed, turned himself to the view window of his office, and opened himself fully to the dark side of the Force. It's worth noting that Palpatine was taught to suppress his nature in the Force by Plagueis. He had this natural ability to do so, but when he refined it, he was able to bury his own inner darkness so deep down that it could not be sensed even when he was in a room full of Jedi Masters. However, this came at the cost of his own perceptions and ability to use the Force, so he was often blind to the things happening around him until he actually opened himself up again, and when he did it this time, the power that he felt nearly took him off of his feet. This is what the novel reads. Palpatine paced away from Pestage. He opened himself fully to the Force and was left staggered by an inrush of overwhelming malevolence. He planted his left hand on the desk for support and managed a stuttering inhale. Somewhere close by, the dark side was unspooling. Despite being a Dark Lord himself and one of significant evil, Palpatine was left staggered by Plagueis' malevolence. That pressure and sheer presence of his master's power in the Force drove the air from his lungs and made him nearly fall over. Palpatine in this moment had several things running through his mind. Firstly, his master was in danger, and he had to run to save him. Not necessarily because he didn't believe his master could handle it, but because he had to make sure that the Jedi didn't get there first. Second though, he was taken aback by Plagueis' power. Long had Sidious wondered if his master was holding out on him. He had seen the Dark Lord's strange experiments, and knew that he had big dreams of controlling the nature of life and death itself. But as for how far those developments had come, Palpatine didn't really know at this point, and wouldn't know for about another 2 decades. Yet now one thing was for certain. Plagueis had been holding back, and he finally had felt proof of that. But rather than Palpatine fearing it, having anger or jealousy, he felt only awe, and later he would hunger to possess that same power. Palpatine and Sate rushed off to the Phobosi district of Coruscant, hoping that they were not already too late. Meanwhile though, Plagueis had already jumped to his feet and was snapping bones, smashing skulls, and punching straight through the chestplate armor of the assassins. This was Darth Plagueis, Dark Lord of the Sith. It didn't matter that one of his 3 hearts had already failed him. He was gushing blood from his neck. He would teach these lesser beings what they had made, and the last mistake of their entire lives. Every object in the room became a storm of deadly projectiles. Plagueis' Force lightning boiled the blood inside of their bodies. The Maladians, being professionals that they were though, did not shirk at the Force powers, but simply were forced to change tactics, coming at Plagueis from various angles and waiting for openings. Another of Plagueis' hearts would eventually fail here as well, nearly paralyzing him with pain. But the Dark Lord managed to throw up an impenetrable Force barrier and release a scream with his damaged vocal cords that shattered every eardrum in the vicinity. Another wave of power caused an earthquaking tremor in the floor, one that took the assassins off of their feet. And with a blast of raw power, Plagueis atomized the bodies of several more of the assassins, Starkiller style. Plagueis was moments from unleashing hell on his remaining attackers with what little energy he had left. That was when Sidious and Pestage entered the room. Sidious went to his master's side and aided him with his own powers in the Force. Pestage wielded a repeating blaster rifle that would lay waste to all of the stragglers. Within moments, the fight was over, and the 3 men were standing ankle deep in blood. Now that Pestage had witnessed their true natures without a shadow of a doubt, he was officially brought into the fold of the Sith. Sidious rushed to his master's side, told him that they had to leave at once, stating that he had felt Darth Plagueis through the Force, and that the Jedi would have felt something similar. However, Plagueis was momentarily delirious from his loss of blood, and fully enmeshed in the powers of the dark. To Sidious' statement, he said this in a raspy voice: "Let them come. Let them inhale the aroma of the dark side." In his aggravated state, Plagueis had more than a moment had forgotten the importance of secrecy. Having nearly died, he relished in the idea that the Jedi would be forced to walk through a toxic cloud of pure darkness, one created by his own power. But Sidious acted as the voice of reason, imploring his master once more. He said that the carnage around them was beyond explanation. They could not be there. And after a moment, Plagueis seemed to come to his senses and nodded in agreement with his apprentice. The two hurried out to escape the crime scene and to get Plagueis some much needed medical attention. But while the Jedi would not be inhaling the aroma of the dark side this day, someone else would. The Grand Protectorate. And their fate would come at the now blood-raged hands of Darth Sidious. Sidious, who would carry out the judgment of him himself. But anyway, my friends, this was the frightening moment that Palpatine felt the full power of Darth Plagueis. I love this moment personally because the mere feeling of Plagueis' ability shocked Palpatine into being a voice of reason. He was so sobered by what he felt in the Force that he had enough clarity to realize that the Jedi themselves would have also undoubtedly felt it as well. Fearing the safety of the rule of two, Palpatine had to convince his own master to leave the bloodbath. Meanwhile, Plagueis, who was barely functioning at all, his very respiratory system failing, he was ready to throw down with anyone else who wanted a taste of his power. But this moment would stick with Palpatine for the rest of his life. This was the first time he got to experience the unfiltered pressure of what a true Sith looked like, and his desire to achieve that sort of potency would never be satisfied. Witnessing what he and his master did that day with the Force may be one of the reasons that he would later tell Vader that the Sith had grown beyond the use of lightsabers entirely. But what do you think about this, my friends? Do you wish that we got more visceral descriptions of what Sith Lords and Jedi Masters actually feel in the Force as they experience it? But as always, my friends, thank you so much for watching today's video and our continued exploration of Sidious and Darth Plagueis, and as always, may the Force be with you.